Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our next series of podcasts or book chats with the Legacies of Learning project. I'm delighted to have Professor Dženita with us this afternoon to talk about her book. And I've also got my colleague Iyad Abu Ali, who's here with me this afternoon to talk about the book in conversation. Just to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Professor Dženita is the Assistant Professor in Religious Studies and Cultural Heritage. Her research focuses primarily on religious history of the Balkans, with a particular emphasis on Islam in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So this is the first time we've had this nature of conversation on our podcast. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you for being here. But also she focuses on the Ottoman Empire and Islam in Europe more broadly. Her past research dealt with Islamic rituals in Bosnia in a longue durée perspective. Her current research focuses on questions of religion, piety, environment, and the contemporary world. So Professor Dženita and Iyad, welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Excellent. Today we're going to be discussing your book, Bosnian Hajj Literature, Multiple Paths to the Holy. This is the first critical and theoretically grounded book-length study of Hajj literature and Hajj practices of Bosnian Muslims. So I'm really honored that you're here. I've had the honor of reading your book over the weekend, and I really enjoyed reading it. I was thinking about myself when I went to Hajj many, many years ago, and it kind of brought back some memories of my own experiences of going on the Hajj pilgrimage. So thank you for writing that book, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Excellent. If I can ask my colleague Iyad to come in with the first sort of questions for the book chat.
Yeah, hi, Dženita. It's great to have you here. And it's a pleasure to welcome you to the book chat to discuss such a far-reaching study that draws together historical and literary analyses, as well as engaging with the most important questions in the field of religious studies, such as material religion, the body, and emotions. So what I'd like to start with is tell us and the listeners how you came to write the book, the questions you had in your mind while approaching this topic, and what you see the contribution of the book as being.
So basically, the way I started thinking about this idea of the book on the cultural history of Hajj, of Bosniaks or Bosnian Muslims, is basically realizing the enormous pervasiveness of Hajj in the individual and communal lives of Bosnian Muslims. So first, starting from the material objects, such as, for example, different paintings, photographs, objects brought from Hajj, all of these things. So if you enter like any Bosniak house, like even in the remotest village, you will find an image, a photograph, something which is reminiscent of the holy places of Mecca and Medina. So historically, we know that most Muslims were not able to go on a Hajj. Hajj was always a very, very expensive endeavor. And lately, I've been following a huge debate on social media regarding the price of Hajj. The price of Hajj, as we know, has risen quite starkly in the last couple of years. And this obviously led to a series of different debates on who can go on a Hajj, who is able to talk about the Hajj in any case. So the questions of class, for example, the questions of economic possibility to go on a Hajj, all of these things are very, very much relevant in the Bosnian public sphere as well. So even despite the fact that the Hajj was such an expensive endeavor materially, Hajj is ever pervasive in Bosnian culture. So it goes, let's say, starting from the material objects, like things brought from the Hajj. Then, if you look into the image of a Haji, the social prestige which a Haji carries in a Bosnian society, it's like the image is also of a person who is enormously not only pious but also influential. So this influence and importance of the figure of the Haji is something which, for example, in the Ottoman times was also reflected onto the non-Muslim population. There are studies such as the study by Valentina Izmirlieva, which talk about the title of the Haji being transmitted, being reflected onto the Orthodox Christian pilgrims. And this is something which you still can see in Bosnian society. So surnames like Hajj, for example, those are like Orthodox Christian surnames, but they carry this combination of the title of the Hajji plus a very Orthodox Christian surname. So the enormous social influence of the image of the Hajji is something which is quite visible in Bosnian society. Then, obviously, there is the spatial element to it. There are places in Bosnia which carry the name of a little Kaaba, meaning that people who could not go on a Hajj termed and named a certain type of a place as a Kaaba, as a place which we associate obviously with Mecca. And this obviously goes also together with what Shahzad Bashir, for example, mentions in his book on visions for Islamic pasts and futures, about places such as this one. And I think he mentions the place of Kudus in Indonesia, which is, it seems to us that it's derivative of Quds in Palestine, but it actually also suggests the imaginative and creative possibilities open to different Muslim societies across different time periods. And finally, what actually kind of drove me to start writing about the Hajj experiences of Bosnian Muslims is this huge number of different types of material or different types of books written about the Hajj, which nobody really wanted to look at. And the reason why people didn't want to look at these types of things was first, these books, which I'm talking about, they were written by common people, by housewives, by people who were not in religious structures, for example, people who were commoners, so to speak, who published them in like 20, 30, maybe 100 copies. For example, for literary historians, these books had no value. They were not taken serious by different, academic authorities, or even like religious authorities. So these types of books, again, are pervasive in Bosnian culture. You, for example, find all types of unpublished material as well, like diaries, which people wrote, memories on Hajj. So I wanted to look at them, and I wanted to basically find the answer to the question of what makes a person write down their memories of the Hajj. What makes a person who has never written anything in their life, what drives them to actually take a pen and write something about the Hajj? So this question is basically something which drove me to start investigating the cultural history of the Hajj, and to see both its religious impact on people, but also its social impact. What does it do in a society it appears in?
Yeah, and the book does that actually so well. And there aren't many books that I can think of that chart the history of a ritual so well over such a long period of time and engages with so many different texts. Just picking up on that, how you're saying this sort of popular texts and discourses and diaries formed the Bosnian Muslim sort of construction of the Hajj. And I really like the way you open the book with the story about Hidayata and Sevilla taking a car to Mecca. So these diaries, if I understand them correctly, represent texts that are, different to scholarly works, travel writings that you discuss later in the book. What role did these sort of texts, if you could expand a bit more, what role did these sort of texts play in the construction of the Hajj itself, but also of the Bosnian self, and especially amongst women?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so basically, there are multiple questions which are related to this. So we can think about, for example, like when do these types of chapbooks or like popular books appear? And basically, we can trace these types of materials to, let's say, Ottoman times, but overwhelmingly, these types of things are available to us in the 20th and the 21st centuries. And now there are multiple reasons for that. One reason can be that we simply don't have the access to whatever has been lost. Bosnia went through different wars. Bosnia was occupied by Austro-Hungarians. Things happened in like different wars, different migrations happened throughout the history. So that's one reason. Like we don't really know the full extent of the material which could have been preserved. The second reason is definitely connected to literacy. So in the 20th century, obviously there are mass campaigns, mass educational campaigns. People start writing more and publishing more. And since people publish more, obviously we do see different types of actors on the scene, on the publishing scene, including women. Women who, for example, before the 20th century, you could not really find, at least I couldn't find any trace of a woman writing, a Bosnian woman writing about her Hajj experiences. But in the 20th century, especially in the second half of the 20th century, there is an abundance of literature which speaks about women's experiences on Hajj. And also, not only that, like there are also normative discourses on the Hajj, women writing about the legal aspects of the Hajj, for example. So these things are tied, like the question of literacy, the question of education, the question of access to the publishing. And obviously, we have to also take into account the political structures in which Bosnian Muslims lived. So during the socialist times, obviously there was a certain type of a censorship. So we do not know, again, the full extent to which women, for example, contributed in terms of writing about the Hajj. So it's only now in the last couple of decades that we can actually see the full extent of the women writing about the Hajj. So basically, there are a couple of elements tied in, like framing this question. What I would say is that when someone like Hidayat and Safia, who went on a Hajj in 1981, when they write about the Hajj, and when knowing that they cannot publish the diary because during socialism it was not really easy to get the access to the public. So why would they write a diary? Like if they knew that not many people are going to read that. I would say one of the reasons why they would write something like that would be definitely to, in a way, extend their experience of the ritual. So they go on a Hajj, they experience it in a very profound and deep way. They describe it as a unique moment of their lives. But then they also, in a way, prolong this experience by writing it. So it's like almost, trying to extend the time and trying to prolong the experience. The second reason would probably be to convince their friends and family members, like whoever was the closest to them, because only the closest members of the family had access to the diary, to convince them to also perform the Hajj. So in a way, it's both reflecting upon one's own experience of the ritual, but also convincing others. And this is like one of the very unique traits of the Hajj literature in general. Like if we look into the Bosnian Hajj literature, but also across the Muslim world, it's a really twofold exercise. It's a twofold deed. It's writing about oneself, but it's also trying to change something in the future. So the Hajj, these Hajj reflections, these Hajj writings are always also future oriented. They do try to also move this discourse about the Hajj forward, which is why I always say I will. I finished my book. I wrote the book, but thinking about Hajj never stops because people go on Hajj every year and they keep writing about the Hajj, and it just keeps moving the whole discourse forward. It's a very, I would say, very vital genre in itself.
Yeah, and it really comes across as something that's constantly alive, almost in Islamic world. I want to. There's a lot of interesting things to pick up on from your answer, but I guess one of the things, if we go back to the socialist, the discussion of the sort of socialist censorship, one of the themes in the book that really it crops up in a number of places in the book is technological changes with modernity, but that, as we've seen, that sort of goes hand in hand with things that make the Hajj more difficult. So although there's advancements in forms of travel, there's also the structures of the state and institutions that might hinder the Hajj. So what would you, going back to Hidayata and Safiya, could you tell us more about sort of the paradoxes of modernity in this respect, the ways that technology might change how people approach Hajj? It also seemed that perhaps going by car and eschewing the sort of formal mode of travel made it more pious in a way in this respect.
Yeah, so first, I think I should clarify, like, we keep talking about Safiya and Hidayata, but let me just clarify a little bit their story. So this is the story of two women who are on the cover page of the book. They went on a Hajj in 1981. They were friends since childhood. And then basically after the Second World War, so after 1945, one of them was imprisoned because she was a member of the Young Muslim Women's Movement, which was a political organization. Although they mostly dealt with helping refugees who were pushed from East Bosnia towards Sarajevo. So they were helping refugees and doing humanitarian work. But after the war, these types of organizations were clamped down, and Safiya was sent to prison, and she spent 2.5 years in prison. So this political past, which Safiya had, it followed her up to the 1980s. And so we're tracing down like these 3-4 decades of socialist period. So in 1981, she has a job. She's quite successful. She's an accountant in one of the huge Yugoslav industries firms. But she still really wants to go on a Hajj. And so she plans this journey with her friend Hidayata, who is a housewife. And so the two of them decide to take also their husbands. But the problem was the husbands couldn't drive or wouldn't drive. There was some issue on that level. So what they do is they drive all the way to Hajj, all the way to Mecca. The reason for driving all the way to Mecca was basically to both, in a way, kind of avoid the attention of the socialist authorities. It was not. I mean, people could go on a Hajj during socialist periods, during different socialist periods, but it was not something you would really necessarily brag about publicly. So that was one of the reasons why they wanted to go on a Hajj in a very clandestine way. The second reason was very. It was very, very simple. They wanted to go and see the cities. They wanted to go to Istanbul, to see Ankara, to go to Damascus, to see all these places. And the third reason, which I think is also very crucial to understand this whole situation, is they wanted to go on a Hajj following this route because they had family members across Turkey and Syria, Jordan. And these family members are basically Bosniaks who moved from Bosnia basically fearing life under the Christian rule, fearing life under the Austro-Hungarian rule in, let's say, the beginning of the 20th century, late 19th, beginning of the 20th century. So they kept connections with these family members, even 70, 80 years later. These family connections were still there. So what does it tell us? It tells us multiple things about borders, technology, movement, especially pious movement and pious mobilities. Although obviously we see the let's say developments in that regard, two women driving all the way to Mecca, they were not even stopped that much by the Saudi police. Apparently they were stopped only once or twice. and they were always let go, and they were always told like that they can drive actually to all the way to Mecca. So there is a certain type, let's say, of a progress there, women driving, going on a Hajj. But at the same time, like we can see that the whole Hajj journey is being impeded by different types of things. So they have to cross borders, they have to carry passports. They constantly are kind of, thinking about these things. Oh, do we have visa for I don't know, Syria? Do we have visa for Jordan? Like there's like those things are constantly on their mind. And this was definitely not the case in the pre-modern times, where you didn't have borders in the nation state kind of sense, and passports, I think, became a thing only in the late 19th century. So there was definitely that kind of type of an obstacle happening there. If we look into the slightly previous period, Bosnian Hajjis often feared of going on a Hajj by this like land route, because there were times when they would be simply placed into the quarantine. And they considered quarantines, especially the modern ones, as a way of often hostile authorities to contain the Hajjis, not only their bodies because they were suspected of carrying diseases, but also Hajjis being at the end, or at the let's say, being suspected as carrying certain types of, let's say, anti-colonial ideological agendas behind. So modernity also brings all of these other things into play. Hajjis being politically very suspect, ideologically very suspect, because you have people traveling from one region to another, being bound by religious devotion. So that definitely raised suspicion especially among non-Muslim authorities. So in a way, we can see here the interplay of the advancements, technological advancements, which the Hajj brought, or which the modern times brought for Hajj and Hajjis, but also the numerous types of obstacles which were placed in front of them. So, for example, we don't even have to look that far to the 1980s or earlier. If we look into just like last decade, the Hajjis were not able to, Bosnian Hajjis were not able to go on a Hajj using the land route because of the war in Syria. And I think there was only one Hajji who managed to cross Syria, who walked basically, who went on foot through Syria. So, politics, nation states, all of these things affect the way people go on a Hajj and experience Hajj to a great deal.
Yeah, thank you. That sort of leads me into the next question, although there are so many things that I need to sort of pick up on. So this podcast or book chat is about is under the theme of legacies of learning. So I do have to ask you about one of the things that stood out was the madrasa and waqf system that was there in pre-modern times. I was wondering what happens to that as modernity, around the time that we see modernity coming. Did scholarly networks change? And I'm thinking of Busnawi, for example. You just mentioned that they still had family in different places across the Middle East, in the cases of Hidayat and Safiya. So I'd be interested to know, how did those things, if there was continuity there, how did it survive? Did it change in some way? Did the network, yeah. So what happens to these networks as you chart this change in the Hajj over time?
Yeah. So basically, to kind of go back to early modern Ottoman times first, what I describe in the first and to some extent the second chapter is the networks of scholars who also contributed to the creation of a discourse on Hajj. And in this network of scholars, Bosnian scholars played a huge role. So we already see somewhere. So for the listeners, the Bosnia was conquered by the Ottomans in the 15th century, And then we see very, very soon, already in the 16th century, we see the emerging scholarly networks, including Bosnians. So we see Bosnians being teachers in places like not only Istanbul, but also places like Cairo, places like Medina, in being engaged in the Hadith networks and so on, in Sufi networks, so on. So places like these classical places of Islamic learning are very important for Bosniaks of the Ottoman times, and they fully participate in it, like writing in Arabic, writing in Ottoman Turkish, writing in Persian. So when we kind of enter the 19th century and the changes which happen within, especially towards the late 19th century and the Austro-Hungarian occupation and then later on annexation, what we see is still the persistence of intellectual circles, but there is a somewhat changed visibility or changed importance of Istanbul and Cairo. So while Bosnian scholars, like their first, let's say, port of departure would be the first port where they would actually, develop their thinking and start writing and start teaching would be definitely Istanbul. Now we do see still networks of learning being organized or being nurtured and maintained in Istanbul. And my colleague Harun Abulna wrote about that quite extensively in his PhD thesis. What we see at the same time is the emergence of Cairo as a very important node. So all the way up to, let's say, the Second World War, Cairo becomes one of the gathering spots for Bosnian ulama, for Bosnian scholars. This happens at the same time when Bosniaks start studying in Vienna, in Paris, so in European cities as well. So it kind of goes parallel to each other. So there are different nodes opening within, let's say, late 19th, early 20th century. With these new nodes like Vienna, like Paris, being open to Bosniaks, to Bosnian Muslims, because many of them already had a very solid training in Arabic, in Ottoman Turkish, in Persian. And this is also the heyday, like the prime time of the Western Orientalism in a way, or Western Orientalist studies. So this is when many of Bosniaks also go to these European cities and establish mini networks of their own. So this is basically what changes with these networks in the 20th, 19th, and the 20th centuries. We see the rise of new centers. And as we kind of go further to further through the 20th century, there is obviously the rise of the importance of Riyadh, especially after the establishment of the university in Medina. So this is when like this additional node becomes quite important. So in a way, as you correctly noticed, networks of scholars did not fully disintegrate with the onset of modernity, but neither did other types of networks. So we don't have only the networks of, let's say, scholarly circles, but so we have these muhajir networks, people who left Bosnia in the 19th century, keeping family relations, keeping family connections to people in Bosnia. Then we have obviously also Sufi connections, which persisted despite the double threat of both socialist modernity, but also religious modernity or religious modernism. So in a way, it's harder sometimes to see and establish these links, but they do persist.
Yeah, thank you so much. One of the things that really struck out, one of the things that really stuck out to me was al-Busnawi's, who, if I'm correct, was sent to Mecca to restore the Maqam Ibrahim. So I really was fascinated by his idea of the mineral state being the highest state of existence, and how he applies that to the black stone. I was wondering,
Oh, I
it
think
really.
it's Abdullah al-Bosnawi, I think.
Ah, yes. Okay, yeah.
I mean, they all carry the laqab of al-Bosnawi because they all
Sorry,
hail
yeah.
from Bosnia. Yeah.
Um, I just wanted to ask a side question on that, which was, it's a really interesting sort of work where you see this sort of potential for Islamic thinking about the Hajj to de-anthropocentrize the landscape in a way. Could you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, so basically what we see in this part, in this, that's a part of the first chapter, what we see is a surprising array of meanings given to Hajj and to holy places. And this chapter basically speaks about the way Hajj was interpreted in a symbolic manner. And this is important to notice here, that the symbolic part is a crucial part of that, because that then it is also connected to the Sufi basis upon which all of these authors write. So many scholars, for example, say that in the pre-modern times, when we look into the writings about the Hajj, most of these writings speak about the symbolic value of the Hajj only within the Sufi context. So if you look outside of the Sufi context, you will not find the symbolic. However, obviously, this changes with the modern times, where the symbolic framework becomes much more pervasive, and it exists definitely outside of the Sufi, of only Sufi frameworks of interpretation. So let me just give you an example. If we see, for example, the Sufis, if we see writings about the Hajj in the pre-modern times, talking about the outward and inward signs of the Hajj, the outward and the inward meanings of the Hajj, we can definitely with certainty know that this comes from, a Sufi context. However, if in the 20th century, if we look into the, let's say, someone writing about the Hajj and talking about it as this huge congress of Muslim peoples, it's kind of a symbolic way of talking about the Hajj, and it's not necessarily tied to the Sufi frameworks of interpretation. So to go back to Bosnawi, so what we see here is an imaginative, creative way of thinking about the Hajj. So what Abdullah al-Bosnawi does is he is talking about the black stone, and he's trying to enumerate its various qualities. And one of these qualities which he emphasizes is the mineral state. The mineral state of a stone, he then poses above the human state, basically because he then praises the mineral state, saying that unlike a human being, unlike the human who is quite uncertain and can be of a very changing character, the mineral state, the stone, is very firm in its belief. So if you throw a stone, the stone will come back. And this driving force is something which Abdullah al-Bosnawi basically equalizes with devotion and complete submission to God. So in this way, we see the reversal of the anthropocentric paradigm, where the humans are no longer standing on the top of the hierarchy of being, but we see something which we don't even necessarily think of, like a rock, like a stone, as being having higher qualities than a human being. And if we kind of want to extend this thinking further, I think in this particular type of analysis, in this particular type of interpreting the meaning of the Hajj, we can actually see many imaginative possibilities, for example, for Islamic environmentalism. So how to, in a way, de-anthropocentrize the Hajj, how to decenter the human from the whole discourse on the Hajj. And I think these types of texts should be explored for these types of things. I mean, I haven't necessarily done that in my book, but I'm just putting it out there that we definitely need to think about these Sufi discourses on the Hajj as, in a way, being very environmentalist in their own right.
No, that's I'm fascinated by that, and it's something that really struck out to me. In the interest of time, sorry, I need to keep skipping across things, but it's interesting to contrast because you go through so many different approaches, and that's one of the strengths of this book. And it's interesting to contrast the pre-modern and modern, but also see how in the modern period things get more complicated. So if we stick with the Sufism theme, we can see this sort of perhaps more rationalist or more secular, if you want to say that in between quotations, approaches to the Hajj and these like popular journalistic travel narratives that are coming across. So one of the examples that stuck out to me was the case of Zuko Jumhur, who writes this journalistic travelogue and sort of points to both sort of a lot of contradictions on that he perceives on the way. So he sees superstitions alongside consumerism. He sees a mixture of ancient and modern on his way to Mecca. Could you tell us a little bit more about how his sort of insider outsider perspective is related to the Yugoslav self, and also are there tensions between that and the sort of narrative of the Bosnian self within the Yugoslav nation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So basically, in order to understand that, we have to know that one of the things which modernity brings onto the scene is also it opens the Hajj for everyone. So we see, I mean, there are obviously in history you do see examples of anti-Muslim, Islamophobic, whatever you want to call it, writings in Christian polemics and so on, which do speak about Mecca and Medina, which speak about the body of the Prophet Muhammad, which speak about these things in a very negative way, and which speak also about the plans to kind of conquer the holy places and kind of bring the non-Muslim within that context, but not in the same way as it happens with the mass media. So what we see here is that, especially from the beginning of the 20th century onwards, Hajj becomes a subject matter, a destination, a place which is debated and discussed not only by Muslims but also non-Muslims. So we see the rise, for example, of mass tourism, and in the period where, I mean, it starts to kind of gain more pace. Mecca and Medina also become they also kind of become a subject topic in much of the popular media. So people are writing about these people who managed to enter Mecca and Medina even though they were not Muslim. So this is like almost like an obsessive topic. And then one of the figures which appears quite consistently throughout the period, so we are talking here, let's say, period from 1930s all up to 1980s, there is a figure of a person who is both an insider and an outsider. So it's usually someone who is, let's say, Muslim by origin, but looks at the Islamic tradition with a very, very critical view. And basically this person obviously has access to certain spaces, access to Muslim spaces, but at the same time will report back to the popular media and will write about it in a very sensationalist view, in a very sensationalist manner. So this is this figure of the insider outsider, and Zuko Jumhur, at least in my interpretation, is one such figure because he does hail from a Muslim family. I think his father was an imam. But he became one of these most celebrated travel authors in Yugoslavia. He traveled all over the world. Like his TV, he even had his own TV show, which was immensely popular. But not many people know that he also went on a Hajj, and not many people know that he wrote about the Hajj in this way. And obviously, the way he wrote about the Hajj was very sensationalist, very very orientalizing, very negative in many different aspects. So this figure of the insider-outsider is a figure which was readily accepted, especially by non-Muslim media. And there is also an additional element of women being these insiders, outsiders. So starting from the 1930s, going all the way up to even today, we do see these figures of women who go on a Hajj, but then complain about a range of things, complain about being legitimately sometimes even harassed, yes, but sometimes this experience is being used to, in a way, bash people who actually go there, like all people who go there. It's used to bash people who want to go there. So it's used to bash Bosnian Muslims who are in Bosnia and who want to go there. So in a way, the outsider-insider figure is sometimes used in quite a negative way by the mass media. And this is what I wanted to basically try to present, which is the fact that Hajj is no longer an object of only Muslim gaze, but also non-Muslim gaze. And in that sense, the discourse on the Hajj also has to include this non-Muslim gaze.
Yeah, and I mean, he reports things in as you say, in quite negative ways, and makes a lot of the sort of emotions that are being shown at certain points in the Hajj, sort of seeing them as sort of in a very negative way, essentially. But at the same time, I guess what you highlight is that this, it's always, this is in always being negotiated, and sort of there are opposing views even in those periods. So you also bring up the idea, the example of Hajji Bayrić, who, I don't know if I said that correctly.
Hajj Bayrić.
Yeah. Who sort of attempts to cultivate an emotional response to Hajj, and really creates this idea of practicing love almost, or practicing devotion to the place. But also he sees literal similarities in the landscapes, for example, of Bosnia and the Hijaz. I wanted to ask, because a lot of this book is about the periphery and the center, right? And how Bosnia is placed on the periphery. And I like this example because it seemed to be almost melding the periphery and the center in a way, through this emotional practice and through this literal sort of similarity between the landscapes. Could you maybe speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Hajj Barić's travelogue is quite unique. So he writes it in the 1960s, and it's published, I think, much later, like a couple of decades later. So Feyzullah Hajj Barić was a sheikh, like a Sufi sheikh in Bosnia. And he was one of the key people who, in a way, tried to preserve these Sufi networks. So networks between Sufis not only in Bosnia, but also Sufis who were in Kosovo, for example. So what Hajj Barić did, he tried to maintain the rituals and ceremonies related to his own Sufi order, but at the same time to keep the visibility of Sufism in public as much as he could. His endeavor was, in a way, threatened by both socialist modernism and modernity projects related to that, and also religious reformism. Because religious reformism, which is in my book presented by another author, Hussein Joseph, was quite vocally against Sufi expressions of piety, not in the sense that they would, in a way, completely silence them, but in a way of, let's say, criticizing the Sufi modes of interpreting, criticizing anything which was deemed to be a superstition, anything which was deemed to be very superfluous and not in service of the socialist reformist project and goal. So Hajj Bayrić plays a very key part in that because against that, basically because he keeps this Sufi mode of interpreting things. And you rightly noticed, like, he does keep, like, the way he writes about the Hajj is profoundly different from the way other people in the book, especially other people in the 20th century, write about the Hajj. So he tries to keep the emotions to the fore. Like, he gives a very valid weight to emotions, unlike Joseph, for example, who really denigrates emotions. Like, he denigrates body, the role of body. He doesn't really want to speak about that. He considers it very secondary. Hajj Bayrić keeps all of that in focus. So what we see with Hajj Bayrić in this blurring of the ideas of what is, Bosnia, where Bosnia starts and stops, and where the Holy Land begins and stops, is something which will reach its full peak later on, after the war, especially during the war and after the war. And with war, I mean the Serbian aggression on Bosnia in 1992, 1995. So this idea that we can't really speak about fixed centers and peripheries, in terms of, even in terms of the holiness, is something which will be more articulated in this later period. And this idea basically goes to say that yes, there is a fixed place of Mecca and Medina, but a human being can still earn or reach its spiritual potential even somewhere which is distant from the holy places, meaning in Bosnia. So Hajj Bayrić, in a way, starts this discourse on blurring the lines, and then it reaches its peak later on.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're almost running out of time, but I really think there's a really important question to ask here about what is the significance of the Hajj for Bosnians today, and specifically in the post-war period, grappling with perhaps trauma, resilience, of course, identity, questions of identity and statehood and such. I can see your book leading to, questions that are very pertinent today. So, when they are, I mean, you cover them in your book. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, basically what happens is, I think that what matters to say in this about the current moment and the Hajj, so how Bosnian Muslims relate to the Hajj in the current moment, is the re-emergence of spiritual geographies, which nowadays do not include only Mecca and Medina, but also increasingly include Bosnia. Bosnia becomes a holy place. So it becomes a place which is almost like the third place. There is a triad. We know the triad, like the standard triad in Islamic tradition, which is you will only visit three places. It's Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem, Al-Quds. But in the Bosnian reworking of this triad, Bosnia emerges as this like third place. Interestingly, like there are travelogues of Bosnians who going to Jerusalem, but especially like in the 1990s, but they are not as prominent as one would think. So there are just a couple of travelogues, and obviously the state framework of the state of Israel and the difficulties which crossing the borders entails. It's like all makes it harder for Bosnians to go there. But in a symbolic way, Bosnia emerges as this third place, and it is a place where Bosnian authors feel this is the place which deserves our sacrifice. So yes, Mecca and Medina they do exist. They have to, it's our religious duty to go there. But the place which deserves the sacrifice, which sometimes deserves the bodily sacrifice, is the place we live in. And it's all tied up with the renewed lenses, the renewed gaze on what Bosniakness means and who Bosnian Muslims are. So the Hajj is almost like a mirror to these new authors to kind of ascertain their place within the context of not only the boundaries of the Islamic world, but also increasingly boundaries of Europe. So there is this reimagination of the role and purpose of Bosniaks, which is reflected in the image of the Hajj.
No, thank you very much. Harun, do you have any questions you'd like to ask?
I mean, I think I have just one really simple question. Thank you for a very fascinating, by the way, Dženita. I just have one question really at the end, and it's just a really short question, I guess, which is, what lessons do you think, when we think about contemporary Muslims, what kind of draw from the Hajj narratives that you've been discussing today and in your book, for particular forms of devotion and identity today? So, what kind of lessons can they draw today? I mean, we talked about borders. We talked about some of the challenges, crossing borders, and these sort of things. What do you think contemporary Muslims could draw from what you've written about?
So what comes to my mind, maybe, I mean, it's really weird. There is usually this trope and about unity in diversity. So how people go on a Hajj to encounter diversity of others. And that is definitely true. Like Bosnians write about that. Like they do write about the diversity of race, the diversity of ethnicity, the diversity of people around them. They definitely do write about that. But surprisingly to me, all of these questions, all of these observations, and they don't really lead to. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't lead to a more sustained discourse on like how actually this diversity should be thought of. Like how should it be like brought to a different level, or in other words, like what does the ummah exist, and like does it really have an effect on individual lives, or the lives of the lives and fate of let's say Muslim minorities in non-Muslim contexts, for example. So I would say that probably like the modern Hajj discourse, it compels people to think about the ummah, but from a very, very critical perspective. So not only through the very rosy, through the what's the word, like through the rosy eyeglasses, but
Rose
to kind of
tinted glasses.
yeah, rose tinted glasses, yeah, but basically to make them think like, okay, is this ummah really like a thing? It obviously is because people are talking about it, but like how can we actually contribute to making it better in a way? So that's something which I always take away from reading these travelogues. Like how do they think about diversity? Like how do they think about this unity in diversity, and does it really exist for them in a positive way?
Thank you. I think we'd have to draw the conversation to an end because of time. It's been a wonderful conversation. I want to thank Iyad for those wonderful questions. Dženita, I know you're really, really busy, so I want to thank you for giving your time. We hope that our viewers will enjoy watching the podcasts or the book chats that we produce, and we'll be producing some more. And we hope to have Dženita again in a not so distant future for maybe further book chats. And I just want to thank everyone for watching. This is part of the Legacies of Learning book chat, part of the Legacies of Learning project, where we're looking at the Islamic history, Islamic civilization, and thinking about how we can answer some of the important questions when it comes to education and civilization in the modern world. So I want to thank everyone for watching. I want to thank once again Dženita for being here, Iyad for those excellent questions. Until next time, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Harun and Iyad.
You're welcome.
Thank you.